In case you were curious, and I know you were, Kamala Harris eats no for breakfast.
Like, don't hear that. Don't hear that. I eat no for breakfast. That's my saying.
Well, I think
I eat no for breakfast.
That's her saying. That's Kamala Harris letting you know how tough she is. Do I visit the border unless I'm in an election? No. Do I worry about the price of eggs or milk or bread unless it's an election? No. Do I care about people being killed by illegal immigrants unless it's an election? No. Eating it all up. Num, 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 num. Delicious. Good Lord. Just that answer alone should explain everything to those people who don't understand why she is not doing better in the polls.
Like, don't hear that. Don't hear that. I eat no for breakfast. That's my saying.
Well, I think
I eat no for breakfast.
That is just so highly uncomfortable. And with everything with Kamala Harris, completely non-connected. Tony Katz today. Good to be with you. 833-468-8669. 833 Tony. That's the number. That's how you get to be a part of the show. Find everything at TonyKatz.com. Updates on Hurricane Helene are still coming in. This death toll over 100. When you actually take a look at this path of destruction through Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina, this whole area of western North Carolina just wrecked, ruined, destroyed. Asheville and areas on both sides just obliterated. The town of Chimney Rock no longer there. We're going to get into that. We've got some people on the ground there who are going to find some good cell reception and get with us. But there has been some real fascinating movement on the polling. And why it is that the Harris team would be desperate for another debate, why Trump doesn't have to do it, and where Kamala Harris is falling down. You know, I've made the argument that any Republican would have been an easier lift than Trump. That is absolutely true from an electoral standpoint. The same thing can be said of Kamala Harris. Anybody would have been an easier lift than Kamala Harris, except for Joe Biden, because Joe Biden didn't know where he was. Did you hear Joe Biden? He was getting ready to go onto Air Force One, or he's going on to Marine One, and he's being asked about the attack that Israel had on both Beirut and on Yemen, on the Houthi rebels, these absolute savage terrorists who have been messing with cargo freighters in the Suez Canal, in the Red Sea, costing Egypt $6 billion. And he's asked about this.
Mr. President, will you deploy more U.S. troops to the Middle East?
Mr. President, has Netanyahu gone too far?
Any comment on the strikes in Yemen, Mr. President?
Both sides have got to settle the strike. Support the collective bargaining effort. I think they'll settle the strike.
Now, maybe you didn't hear it. When asked about the strikes in Yemen, Joe Biden said, I've spoken to both sides. They've got to settle the strike. I support the collective bargaining effort. I think they'll settle the strike. He's talking about the longshoremen and the strike that might happen on the East Coast, in the Gulf. You're talking about Great Lakes areas as well that may have these strikes. He doesn't even understand the question being asked of him. No wonder they replaced him, no matter how ugly it was, no matter how much of a coup it actually is, and took a woman who never got a vote in a primary and gave her the nomination. She's a mess. A mess. And the polling tells the same exact story. The Real Clear Politics average has this spread at 2 points for Harris. But the last three polls, Rasmussen, CNN, and Quinnipiac, +2 for Trump, +1 for Harris, and a tie. What happened to the +6 here and the +5 from Morning Consult and the +4 from CBS? Maybe there's a question about how they do the polling, because those were outliers and everything else We're talking about 2,000 likely voters in one poll, 1,728 in another poll, isn't showing any movement for Harris. They told us that the trend lines were moving her way. We said this isn't true. Pennsylvania, because of course it's not about national polls, it's about the battlegrounds. Trafalgar Group leans right, and it's +3 for Trump. So it's important to note that where they lean. But Fox News poll, which was 775 likely voters, a margin of error of 3.5, a little high in my view on the margin of error, it's a tie. The Atlas Intel poll, I don't know much about Atlas Intel, 1,775 likely voters, margin of error of 2, so they really think they've got this on point, Trump +3. Pennsylvania has Trump leading the overall, the Real Clear Politics average by 0.2. At this stage of the game, this date in 2020, Biden was up over 6 points. Biden was up over 6, and he won the state by 1.2. That is Pennsylvania falling for Trump and away from Kamala Harris, a state she desperately needs. Wisconsin shows 0.8 for Harris in the Real Clear Politics average. The last two polls, +2 for Harris, +2 for Trump. On this day, remember I said 0.8, she's up 0.8. And on this day in 2020, Biden was up 5.5, and he won the state with 0.7. He won the state with basically the same number Harris has right now, but he lost 5 points in the interim. That's Wisconsin. You go battleground after battleground after battleground, and nothing is moving in her direction. North Carolina, where there's going to be a lot of attention on this disaster response and how things went and how people dealt with it. The last poll was East Carolina University, 1,005 likely voters with a margin of error of 3. It had Trump up +2. Trump is up in the overall Real Clear Politics average of 0.6. At this stage of the game in September of 2020, this day, Biden was up 0.5, and Trump won the state with 1.3. Tell me more about how she's connecting and how there's joy and great enthusiasm. There's no connecting, there's no joy, there's no great enthusiasm. I didn't even mention Michigan. I did not mention Michigan because I don't have to. Elisa Slotkin, who is the Democratic representative from Michigan, she can say it far greater than I can.
I'm not feeling my best right now about where we are on Kamala Harris in a place like Michigan right now. We have her underwater in our polling.
So in Democratic internal polling, stuff they don't share, they've got Kamala Harris underwater. Oh, okay. Yet they're going to tell us how terrible Trump is and this, that, and the other. And you might think he's terrible, but they think that that's enough. They refuse to connect the dots and recognize that Kamala Harris doesn't connect. You want more proof of this? This was fantastic. This was NBC News yesterday. When you looked at their first story, if you go to NBC News, I know you don't often do that. Go to NBC News. Just do it for me. Do it for Tony. And click on politics. Bloop, right there. Politics. And you'll see some stories about how Trump is ramping up his pace of campaigning in the sprint to Election Day. Well, I assume everybody is. It's the final month. You people got to see it. You got to be out there hitting those battleground states, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Arizona. That's where to expect him. Michigan as well. But right there's a story. And if you looked at the story and they had this graph up, you'd be like, it said Harris, a picture of Kamala Harris, 54%, and a picture of Donald Trump, 40%. And you look at that and you say, oh, they've got Harris up 54 to 40. This is just ridiculous. No. Take a second to read what they're talking about. They're talking about Latino voters. 54% for Harris, 40% for Donald Trump.
Yeah, Kristen, some interesting stuff here. Again, we see every 4 years the Latino vote becomes a bigger and bigger share of the overall electorate. Well, among Latinos, our poll shows Kamala Harris leading Donald Trump 54 to 40%. Now, for some context, this is a little bit better for Democrats than they were doing among Hispanics when Joe Biden was their candidate. But I think the bigger story here is historically, 54 to 40 now is a 14-point advantage for the Democrats. Take a look back at the last three presidential elections, and these were the results in the exit polls among Hispanic voters.
In 2012, Democrats were up 44. That was the spread between Democrats and Republicans. In 2016, it was 38. In 2020, it was 33. And right now, it's 14. That's a bad day for the Democratic Party. This is telling you what we already knew. There is no connection. And then throw it to Harry Enton over there at CNN.
But look at where Kamala Harris is today. She's only leading by 9 points. That would be the worst Democratic performance in a generation, 10 points off the mark of Joe Biden, who, of course, won 4 years ago, was sort of that union guy, Union Joe, right? Won it by 19 points. She's 10 points off his mark, and the worst in a generation.
What are they talking about? Union households. In 1992, Bill Clinton won union households 30 points over the Republicans. When Hillary, the worst candidate and the most unlikable candidate in recent American history, she got union households by 12 points. Joe Biden increased it to 19 points. And Kamala Harris doesn't even hit double digits. She doesn't hit double digits. I believe it's the worst performance, as Harry Enton describes it, since 1984. So it's actually a much bigger story. People are going to talk about it as Kamala Harris, and they're going to try to insulate it that way, to silo it. Don't let them, and don't let yourself. This is not about Kamala Harris. This is about the Democratic Party. They don't connect. That doesn't mean that they don't win. And I'm telling you, based on election results, we're going to have a really good time with the conversation of candidate quality. Remember that in 2022? It was all the rage. Everybody was talking about candidate quality. Oh, wait till we get to that. They have lost Gen Z because Gen Z is tired of hearing that everything is terrible and that they're terrible. They certainly have lost men. And their push on masculinity has returned, and it is adorable. How Jen Psaki has a job is beyond belief. Jen Psaki is going to tell Doug Emhoff, the second gentleman, the husband of Kamala Harris, that he's really creating a new masculinity for people to look at. This is the guy who, when he was married to his first wife, was banging the nanny, impregnated the nanny. But he's the masculinity that Jen Psaki is slobbering over. She's precious. It's Jen Psaki. You're losing men. You're losing the Gen Z. You're losing Hispanics. That is bad stuff. Very, very bad stuff all the way around. And everyone's going to say it's because of Kamala Harris. There will be an extent to which that is true. I think this is about the Democratic Party. Kamala Harris doesn't connect. And they don't connect. And you could say anything you want about Trump, and you might be right. But when he talks about the price of eggs, when he talks about ending wars, when he talks about an America that's better than it is today and is actually strong and has a good future, people connect with that in a big, big way. I'm Tony Katz. This is Tony Katz Today.